So in this lesson, we are going to be providing an option to load the sheet data and also create a shareable web URL that the user can just simply share as a web URL. So if it doesn't have an ID, then it's going to give us an opportunity to load the ID. So there's quite a few conditions that we still want to add into this application before we complete the functionality, but we are going to have the option to load a web URL. So depending on what the sheet ID is, you can enter in and you can create different sheet IDs and load them here. And then when you go to the web page, it will load the sheet contents there. So this will load in within the array, the word list, whatever words we've got from the first column of the array. In addition as well, if we have spaces, because we only want to load single words, then if we have spaces, the array that we're going to be producing is going to split the words. So if there's multiple words, so it's going to split them by the spaces and then load those into our word list. And then once we're ready to start the game, we can click Start Game. It also produces a shareable link. So if you want to share any of these word list links, we can share those. There's also a clickable link so that we can see that particular word list being loaded, this one loaded. And what it's doing is it's taking the ID from the request URL and it's automatically loading and also loading that as a shared ID link. So we still need to make some updates to the way it's being displayed, but we do have the start game functionality where it's taking the value, and this is coming directly from the spreadsheet list and outputting it, so it's not scrambled yet, and also providing a place for the user to type in their guess, and then there's a button for the user to be able to click and check their guess. So that's what we're doing in this lesson. We're going to continue to build out this word scramble game from scratch where it's generating word lists coming from spreadsheets. Let's go ahead and update the application so that we can launch and create a game out of it. So we've got a few different word lists. We've got the basic default word list, and then we're also able to load word lists from the sheet. You can also provide the option to load multiple word lists, so you don't have to clear out what's already contained within the My Words. So you can remove out the My Words length, and then that will allow you to concatenate to the My Words array. So always adding and updating to that array. But for this example, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep it at whatever the current word list is and load all of the sheet data and have all of the words there. So I also want to have an option that if the user wants to create a web URL that they can share, that it takes in this ID value, and we're going to populate that ID value into the web URL. So we want to pick up that information from the window location. So let's create a variable. We can call it QS for query string. And then using the window object, take the location property and do a search value. And for now, we'll just log out what we get back for the QS. And if there is an ID there, so this is the request value there, so we've got the question mark ID, and then we can use this and get the parameters from there. So let's get the URL parameters, params, and create a new URL search parameters object. And let's use the content from the QS object, and let's output those parameters into the console. And now we can search and we can get anything that's contained for ID. So we have the options to use the different URL search parameters methods. So let's get the one by with the name of ID, and that's going to return back the ID value. So if there is a value, so if it does exist, if it doesn't exist, so if we do something like IDX, we're going to return back null. So that way we can have, instead of populating the sheet value with the ID, we can have a condition whenever the page loads that will populate it, and we're going to update the value of ID. So let's have a condition, and if we do load, so if it does exist, Then we'll set the value of ID, and this we're going to make it so that we can manipulate it and set the value of ID to whatever we've got there. So if it does exist, then it will load the ID. And let's also remove out the default ID. So whenever it loads, it automatically now is populating from here. And this is also going to provide us a way to share the ID as well. So if we do have an ID and if we have populated it, then let's update and add to the output area. We're going to append that this is the web URL. So if we output the window location, and this is a window object, again, is similar to the document object, where it just is a giant JSON file with a lot of different objects and properties and values and also methods that we can access. So selecting the window location, and if we do the href, that's going to return back the port that we're using. So if we add those together, where we've got the ID with the value, so let's construct our temporary URL and add to it. So we've got the question mark, ID, and ID equals, and then whatever we've got for the ID value. And I'm going to output that on the page as a shareable link URL. So let's create an object, so document create element, and the element that we're creating is going to be an input. And then within the input, so my URL is going to have a value of whatever we've got for the temp URL. And then also let's append it to the page. That way, if the user wants to, if there is an address, they can easily select that. So let's take the my URL object and add an event listener. And the event listener is going to be when we make a selection. And we would just want to make a selection of all of the content. So we'll take the my URL and then run the select method, and that's going to select all of the content. And actually, I'm going to update this to on focus. So whenever we focus, it's going to make a selection of the input content. And then the user can easily copy and paste it into their web browser or share the link. And that's only going to show up if we have an ID. If we don't have an ID, then it's just going to load whatever the default ID is. So that gives us a way to have a shareable link. And I also want to have a way to add the link that in case we do load an ID that we want to create that shareable link. So if the user comes in and they load a separate ID, that it's going to generate the shareable link. So we're going to put all of this information into a function that when we're creating the input and adding it to the page, that this is going to be the shareable link. So we've got the value that's coming in from the temp URL, so we can pass in and create a function that can handle passing in those values. Create share link and whatever the URL is going to be. And actually, I'm not going to use URL. I'll just use the link value. And so this way we can pass it into a function, and we can also generate a link whenever the user loads a new ID. And that way we can have the links in a number of ways we can display the links. So let's pass the value of the temp URL into the shareable link. And then that way we're going to append it to the output, whatever we've got for the link value. And let's just double check to make sure that it is still working. And this is only going to work if we have ID is equal to. And we also need to update and construct that my URL. So that was the other part that we created a URL. So let's add the option for creating the link. So now it's creating the link. And we also want to create the links whenever we do the share of the URL. And also alternatively, we also want to have an anchor link as well. So using the document create element, let's create an anchor tag. And then within the anchor link, the text content is going to say shareable link. And then for the anchor link, let's set the attribute. And the attribute that we're setting is going to be the href, so the location of where it's going. So it's going to whatever the link value is. And let's also append this to the page as well. So we're going to append it above. So that way we can add multiple shareable links. And then just whatever the URL is for the shareable link. And that actually should be link value, so not the my URL, because we're passing in the object. So let's double check and see what happened here. So we did get the shareable link. And it does look like we've got the link, but then we're adding it again. So let's make an update and make a fix to this. And the reason for that, and we can see more information about what the window object is. So let's take away the href location from the console, and that's going to return back the object. And within the object, when we're using the href, that's going to include the full path with the request variable of the ID. And whereas we're pulling out the request variable from the search value just over here and returning back the ID. So the one that we actually want to use is the origin. So let's update that and set that to origin. And that should just return back the clean value and allow us to check for the ID and add the ID in properly. So let's see what happens now. Now it looks like we're just getting that object, and when we click it, we're able to go to the page and it's displaying that value. Let's also make this text a whole lot smaller, as it's awfully large. We can add in a styling to it. So doing a class list and add, and I'll just create a class called myLink. And then within the styling, so this way we can add the font size, and we'll make it really small, so 0.6 EM, so it's readable on the page. We'll also text align, so we can center text align and set it to display and do a block display, so it takes up the full width. Shareable link. And we'll remove the text decoration, so remove out the underline, and we'll actually do the text decoration to none, so that will remove out the underline, and also add in some padding around it and margin at the bottom, so that's separated out, and just slight margin at the bottom. So there we've got the shareable link. And what we want to do is have the option to reproduce this. So whenever it gets clicked, it's going to reproduce more links, append them to the bottom. So we want to have that option that when we click the button, we create another share link. So let's do that as well. And in this case, maybe what we want to do is just pass through the ID. So instead of passing in the temporary URL, we just want to pass through the ID. So let's grab that, and when we create the share link within the function, we're just going to pick up whatever the ID is. And we'll just call it my ID. And that will update, and that way we can generate the temporary URL. And that can all be done with just the ID. And that way we're not using, because we're using a global variable within here. So let's update that and set the ID that way. And I'll update the name of this to be whatever the link value is. So that way, once again, it's working. Let's update and add in an attribute that we're going to set the target of the hyperlink to open up on a new page. So that's the underscore blank for the target. So now when we click it, it'll open up in a new tab. And we want to load another shareable URL. And actually, I'm going to remove out the margin at the bottom, as we don't exactly need that. And for the input, I'll add in a margin at the bottom of 10 pixels. So that will provide some separation for the inputs. So now that we've got the shareable link, we want to be able to create a shareable link as well whenever we properly load the ID. So that will just create a shareable link whenever we make a fetch request, and we've got a successful fetch request that will create a shareable link ID and adding it to the bottom of the page. So that way we can take that link and we can share it as needed to others. And that also lists out the words. One other thing that I did want to take care of, and that was that we do want to have a word scramble. So we just want one word. We don't want multiple words. So the option here is that as we list through the word list, we want to separate out the words and have them independently. So whatever we're getting and returning back, we want to split it by the spaces. So whatever we got for temp, we want to split the values. So let's create a temporary holder variable. And then we're going to take temp and use the string method to split them into an array. So split it by space. And then let's push into the array the holder content. So let's see what happens. So now instead of having separate words, we were able to slice them in. So let's take a second look and see what we've got here. And in the output, it looks like we've got extra spaces, but we don't have those spaces within the word list. So when we load it and we take a look at the array, what's happening is that it's adding in the arrays into the array. So we're creating multiple arrays within the array, and that's not exactly what we want. There's a quick and easy solution to this. So add the 3 dots in, and that's going to add in the array items properly into your array. So now we've got a list of all of the words, so all of the different words that are available within the first column. So it's separated out. So even if we have spaces, it's going to add in those spaces and create that word list that we've been after. So single words, and now we're ready to create the gameplay. So once we load this, we want to show the start button. So let's create the start button for the game. So document and create element. The element that we're creating is just a button object. And then with the start button, let's add that. So start button. And I want to add that under the input. So where we're appending to the sheet, we're appending to the button. And then afterwards, we want to output and append the start button. And what we're going to do first off is we're going to disable the start button. So we're going to do a display none of the start button. So there's our start button, no content in it yet. So take the start button and let's add some text content to the button. Start game. So there we've got our start game button, and it's added to the page. And then whenever we hit the start button, let's add an event listener to the start button and listening for the click event. And that's just going to run the function to start the game. And then the whole start game function, we can do down here at the end. And this is just going to take one of the words from the list and present the word in a scrambled format. So let's create start game, so that whenever we click the start button, we're ready to start the game. So we have an option to load the sheet by ID or just use whatever the default words are. And this is going to provide us the list of words, and then we're also ready to start the game. And there's our words. So let's scramble the letters. So let's go back into the JavaScript, and we want to have a game area. So let's have that game area. And we'll just create a div for that and give it a class of game area so that we can select and we can launch the game within this area. And as well, we can separate output and hide the output area. So within the const, create a game area. And this is going to be using the document query selector, selecting the element with a class of game area. So that will select it from the page and allow us to use it. When we click and we start the game, we want to take the output and update its style to display and set that to be display none. So when we start the game, it's going to do a display none. If we load the sheet data, that will give us the word list that we want. If we hit start the game, so just go to display none. And we're log out the value of the my words. And we'll do a check to see if my words length, and if it's less than or equal to 0, that's going to mean that the game is over because we don't have any more words within the word list. So just type in game over. And if the game isn't over, then that means the game is in play. And I'm going to create a global game object that we can use. And for this global game object, so it will have whatever the selected word is. So currently it's just going to be blank. And this is just going to populate the selected word. And also the scramble word value. So I'm just adding in some placeholders within this game object. And let's do one for words left. And right now that's 0. And we'll populate this information when we start the game. So once we start the game, we're going to take the game select and take the my words, and using the shift method, because this is going to be an array, we can remove out the first word within the list and add it into our gameplay area. And then also we can calculate the number of words left. So that will just be coming from the my words length. And so we can show the user how many words are left. And then what we also want to do is we want to scramble the letters of the words. So let's create the scramble of this word. So we need to track the correct word, and then we also need to track whatever the scrambled version of the word is. And we'll create a function for it. We'll call it sorter. And this is going to take in the game word, and that's contained within the game select. So this will scramble the content of the word. And then within the game area, and within the game area, you can do this with JavaScript, or you can have I'll call it word output. So that's where we're going to put the scrambled word. And then also we'll have an input type and equal that to text. And then also let's add in a button and have a guess area. So now the user can see the word, they can enter in their guess, and then they can click the guess to check to see if they've got the right word. So selecting the content, so we've got the game area object, and let's take the game area, and using query selector, we're going to select the first div there that's available, and then update the text content of the div to have the selected word. So hit start game, and we don't have a function sorter yet. And for right now, it'll just return back the word. So it's not going to scramble that, and we can handle that later on. So we start the game, provides us the word that we're scrambling. And we actually should update this list to have single words within our default list. So that was why we're throwing an error there with the extra spacing. So we can have an option to start the game. That's the word. This is where the user enters in the word, and then they click the button to check if they've got the correct word. And let's update and apply some styling to these elements. And we'll do a text align, so we'll center the text and make a font size. So this will be 2EM for the font size. Start game. So there's our scrambled word. And then for the game area input, so game area input, we'll do a larger font size of 1.2 EM. See what that looks like. And then also for the game area itself. And we're still going to do some more styling to clean it up. You can set a background color and add in some padding and also border. And you can apply whatever styling. So start the game and it shows the interface. So right off the bat we should hide the game area. So game area object, apply style, and display is equal to none. And it's only when we start the game that we actually want to see this. So we're going to, when we click the start game button, we'll set this to block. So start the game. It shows the scrambled word. Well, we're going to scramble that in the next lesson, and then allows the user to input and have a guess to whatever the word is. So coming up next, let's output and update this application to wrap up and create the full gameplay. So there's still a few bugs and a few tweaks that need to be made. The tasks for this lesson are to use the window object and get the web URL as well as the request values, and then use them within the JavaScript code in order to set the ID in the web URL link. Also link to the game using a specific sheet. So provide the user the option to update the sheet content, provide an option for the sheet for a new word list, and have that sheet load in different word lists depending on what the sheet ID is. Also create the game area where we've got the functionality. So we've got the different fields within the web page where we have ability to add in the scrambled word, also to provide the user an area where they can enter in their guess, and then a button that the user can click in order to track their guess. So add all of that into your project, and you're going to be ready to move on to the next lesson where we're going to finalize the gameplay.